Alright. Welcome, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I don't know where this accent is coming from. This is your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy Boys, where we watch an episode of Buffy and dissect it witheringly from a queer and feminist point of view. My name is Joel. I'm one half of the host, and the other half is
Brian. Hey, how's it going? Hi.
Hi. Okay, so we're here, we're excited, we're here in queer, and we're going to be watching and reviewing the episode What's My Line Part 1, which is, have we had many two-parters before? I know that...
No, oh, sorry, well, Welcome to the Hellmouth and the Harvest is a two-parter.
Yeah, so this is kind of our first, I would say, proper au natural A-grade two-parter, and
it's the first good one, actually.
First good one, definitely. Yeah.
It's season 2, episode 9 as well, which is important to note.
Season 2, episode 9. And the first two-parter was really a pilot television event, a TV movie. So this is an exciting episode. We're kind of getting into the meat of season 2 now. So Brian, who wrote and who directed this episode?
Sure. So it was written by Marty Noxon and Howard Gordon, and it was directed by David Solomon. So I have a bunch of information about all those people, obviously.
Lay it on me. So
Marty Noxon is a huge person in Buffy. She was the executive producer of the show from season 3 onwards, essentially. This is her first episode to be written, and she becomes a core part of the Buffy team. She has done a bunch of other things. She did a bunch of Unreal, which is the reality TV show kind of drama
about the reality TV.
Yeah, it's really good, actually. Has a really, really beautiful guy in it, whose name I can't remember, but he's on Drag Race as a judge at one point.
Guest judge, not the guest star.
Yeah. She also made Sharp Objects, which was a TV show on HBO about 6 or 7 months ago, maybe a bit longer, actually. Probably a bit longer, with Amy Adams, based on a Gillian Flynn novel, I think. But it was really fucking good. It was American Southern Gothic in modern day, and just
child murder in a small town, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Patricia Clarkson being the best Patricia Clarkson she can. Patricia Clarkson, it was wonderful. Marty Noxon became the supervising producer for season 4 of Buffy when Joss wanted to do work on Angel because that was premiering at the time. She kind of took reins. She cast Amber Benson as Tara. And she got some backlash around season 6 for the conclusion of that season. Apparently, people were like, "Oh, shows that Joss wasn't there," or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, the other person who wrote it was also Howard Gordon. This is the only episode he wrote. The writing staff and the directing staff is actually different for the second episode of this.
Oh, weird.
Two-parter. But anyway, yeah. But he did 2 years in Angel after this. He did X-Files before this, and he produced Awake. Do you remember Awake?
No.
It was
Is this about waking up while you're in surgery?
No, actually. It was the Jason Isaacs. I think there is a movie called Awake that's about that. It's the Jason Isaacs detective TV show where he's in between 2 different realities, one of which his son died in a car crash and the other of which his wife died in that car crash.
Okay.
Yeah, it was only ran for 1 season. It was fascinating. And basically he kept solving murders and stuff by having information from both different timelines. Mm-hmm. And he never slept, or he never got to rest, basically. So it's pretty cool. He also did 24 for a while, up until its conclusion, and he did Homeland. With the director, David Solomon. This is the first of 19 episodes he directed, so he's a pretty prolific director of Buffy. He also produced a lot of Buffy, and he did a good bit of Dollhouse.
Which is a Joss Whedon property that you're quite fond of, I think, weren't you?
Yeah, I really like Dollhouse. It has a really soft spot for it. And this was first aired on November 17th, 1997.
We're really still quite a ways away from the millennium, aren't we?
Yeah, it really is.
Really putting the age on it. Okay, cool. So, What's My Line, Part 1. Give us the Buffy Ann summary on it there, Brian.
I will do. This episode guide has a question mark after What's My Line. I don't think that is actually part of the title. I'll put a question mark over that. Anyway, so Spike plans to cure Drusilla and hires demonic assassins to kill Buffy, who has problems of her own. It is career week at school. Kendra, the Slayer, created by Buffy's brief death, arrives in Sunnydale and attacks Angel, leaving him to burn in sunlight. So, Kendra isn't created by Buffy's death. She becomes the Slayer by Buffy's death. That's so lazy.
Something fully formed as an adult by Buffy's death. Yeah. So
this is basically
a couple of important things happening in this episode. We have obviously in the introduction, the fact that when Buffy died, she created a second Slayer and a split in the Slayer line. You have Kendra the Vampire Slayer arrives. You have the Order of Taraka, who are the assassins that Spike hires to try and murder Buffy, and just really a lot of development of the lore around Buffy and Angel's relationship, and a big Spike and Drusilla. So it's very, very meaty, not in terms of the plot. I suppose something that I wanted to chat about was how Buffy actually approaches storytelling, because I was thinking about this a lot this week, because I was playing really getting into this video game which came out years ago, which I've only started playing now, called Hollow Knight.
It only came out in 2017, I think.
It was a little bit longer than that, wasn't it?
No, I don't think so. I think it was 2017.
Okay. Well, you played it through. I didn't pay any attention to it. And now playing it now. It's very similar to, if anyone's familiar with either, which we may have mentioned once or twice before, Dark Souls or Bloodborne or any of those From Software games. But I was playing it kind of obsessively this morning before we kind of watched the episode. And I was thinking about the similarities to how games like that approach storytelling in terms of how Buffy also approaches storytelling, which is actually quite different from how we approach fantasy and supernatural and sci-fi storytelling in modern shows. And it's very much that the clues are there to be uncovered. You know, this world is presumed to be fully formed. You can find little snippets of text here or reference there, an image there, from which you can kind of construct your own interpretation of the story, but it's never fully laid out for you. It gives you a sense of, which is something I think Buffy does very specifically. You're in this world, it exists, but the job of the characters aren't to sit down and say, yay, on the first day Uzziah the vampire begat, Jebediah the vampire, etc. It's not really that approach at all, which I think is really interesting, which I think really helps draw in the player, as it would be in the case of, say, Hollow Knight, or the viewer in the case of Buffy. And I think it's something that's really gone by the wayside in the modern, even Game of Thrones, MCU approach to storytelling, where people feel entitled to know everyone's entire history and what's happening at all given times.
Yeah, actually, I have two great metaphors here. So one is that, do you remember that episode of 6 Feet Under in season 4 where, or maybe it's season 3, but where Claire is has gone to art college, and she is talking, or she and her boyfriend at the time, Russell, who turns out to be gay-ish, maybe?
I don't know.
Ben Forster,
Forster, yeah.
Who turned out to be Angel in the really bad X-Men movie, and he was in actually a really good movie recently, which was Leave No Trace, which is about him and his daughter, who basically are survivalists. It was really, really good. Really recommend watching it. The actress in it, I think, was one of the best young actresses I've ever seen in any movie. Anyway, but she is talking to him, and Nikolai Castro-Stal is their art teacher. I can't believe I remember that. That's the name of the character, like. Anyway, so maybe, or Olivier Castro.
It's Olivier.
It says Olivier, yeah. So he basically, they both make a piece of art. Russell makes a piece where it's a statue with his head on backwards, and Claire makes a termite kind of egg that's cracking at the top. And he says, oh, this represents both of your styles of art. Russell, your elephant art, it's, my head is literally on backwards, and screaming, and it's loud and obnoxious, or whatever. Not obnoxious, sorry. It's loud and direct and in your face. And Claire's is like insidious, and it's termites. It'll eat away at the foundations, and it'll like crawl in there. And me and you've always talked about like termite art versus elephant art. And yeah, that kind of Dark Souls, Hollow Knight, and to some degree Buffy is definitely a bit of termite art. The real core of it isn't just shoved in your face. It is generally, it'll sink its way in and kind of like scratch away at the surface until it gets to, the core of what's there. And it's definitely, an underutilized skill. In terms of Dark Souls, that's really interesting, because the director of the games, he famously, his name is Hidetaka Miyazaki. He famously apparently had this experience when he was young where he would read Western fantasy novels, but his English wasn't perfect, and he was trying to learn via reading these things. So there'd be major gaps in his knowledge while he was reading these things. He would, all the information would be there, but he could only access certain parts of it. So there was a huge, someone basically took a text and just swiped a bunch of it away. It was his experience of these novels. And when he went to create these fantasy games, he basically took the same approach, whereby, there's story there, but there's just swathes of it, swathes of it just brushed away, and you can't ever quite complete the picture, and you have to fill in the gaps and make leaps. And yeah, I think it's a really cool approach to storytelling.
Yeah, it's deft, and I actually think it's very interesting. It's something that Buffy has really brought me to appreciate more, because, you know, I was saying this earlier, that I can't think of any fantasy show like Buffy that predates Buffy. There's some small examples. There's things like there's soap opera things like Dark Shadows. There's the X-Files existed, kind of not really fantasy, but, you know, supernaturalish things like Twin Peaks existed. But we take for granted now that in the years since, there's just a plethora of things like your, you know, the Flash, your Green Arrow, your Supernatural, your True Blood, Vampire Diaries, all these kind of things, which wouldn't exist without Buffy, in my opinion. Kind of
Teen Wolf, a big one there.
Teen Wolf, yeah, all in this mode of something that's a sustainable, often a small town in America, but it's a sustainable supernatural story. And what these, in many ways, lesser properties often have missed is exactly what you're saying there, and something that Buffy does very well, which is you need to take just enough away of your story where the person or the viewer or the reader or the player is convinced, like, a story is there, that these things do connect together. Just someone has scuffed off the bit of text that they need to read. Not that A, these elements are completely disconnected and can't be combined, or B, completely laid out for you in a way that's really boring, essentially. And basically, I suppose what I'm alluding to, that things like Hollow Knight do and the Dark Souls games, are you reconstruct what happened from, you might
small clues,
like a little bit of text. It might be an item you pick up that no one really bothers reading, but if you do, it gives you a tiny bit, a little, you know, painting that's on the wall in the background, the color of someone's armor and how that's different from everyone else's armor in the area. It's little bits that are meant to inspire the actual heart of storytelling, which is this dynamic connection between elements. And it's a key difference in a text like Buffy, in a game or anything, where you need to feel that it's alive. It's not just a series of things going through the motions. You need to feel like Buffy gives, and I would be a lore master. Like, that is why I approach these things. Buffy gives very little information about its world, and some of it is contradictory, but it has such conviction in it that it is real, that it draws you in. And comparatively, like, something actually I thought was an interesting example in terms of Game of Thrones, which we've talked about recently, is George R.R. Martin, while he's delaying writing the next Game of Thrones books, next Song of Ice and Fire
there
book.
There are 2 left, aren't there?
There's 2 left.
That's mad, Jesus.
But he wrote a different book called Fire and Blood, which was critically panned. And it was basically the history of the Targaryen Empire for the last 10,000 years, written as if it was just a historical text. And literally, Aegon begat Jaehaerys, begat Rhaenyra, etc. And what people said was it was exactly what people didn't like, or what it didn't have exactly what people did like about his writing, is that there was no life in it. It was just literally a series of dates of people you don't care about and things you don't care about, just dry. And I think Buffy really avoids that, in always making, when you introduce something like the Order of Taraka, or, you know, this book, the Dulac manuscript that Giles is so afraid of, like, they're potentially very tiny elements, but they're imbued with quite a lot of excitement. You get excited about it.
Yeah, it's something that, like, you know, like, it scratches the part of your brain that says, oh, what is that? And can I find out more about that? And never quite gives you a huge amount of answers. Or if it does, by the time you've gotten the answers, it's put a new tickling part in your brain that you want to find out about. It's like there's definitely something to be written about. I mean, like, you know, when you watch a new TV show and it's a mystery TV show and it has loads of, like, unanswered questions, like the beginning of Fringe or something, and or even Sharp Objects or something like that. Mysteries are so fascinating as a structure for any plot, especially television, because they're so difficult to maintain. I think Buffy does a great job of that throughout, because when it doesn't have a mystery, it has great interpersonal relationships, you know? But if you look at, say, Desperate Housewives season 1 had a great mystery at its heart. It was really good. It was really well structured, really well thought out in the way it kind of interacts with itself. And then when it gets to season 2, it's like, oh, we needed another one. And they kind of keep going with that. They keep trying to replace it, and they never realize kind of what it is that makes that show special. Yeah. Or season 1 special, which was like season 1 of Desperate Housewives, excellent TV, you know?
It's one of the hardest things to do, I think, specifically in television writing, is that your fans and people viewing will always say, I want to know more about this. And you have to be so careful about what you give them and when you give it to them, I think you would struggle to think of a genre TV show that hasn't had a mystery that has had to be managed. You have who is the smoking man in X-Men,
who killed Laura Palmer,
who is the observer in Fringe, what's the Doctor's name in Doctor Who, things that have been presented in different ways, and obviously in Game of Thrones, like who is the Night King and this kind of stuff, who is Jon Snow, who's Jon Snow's parents. All of those are examples where they were handled in different ways to different ends, and sometimes you can give too much, and I think Buffy never hangs his hat entirely on a mystery like that. Often the viewer knows what's happening and Buffy doesn't. And I think that shows a great confidence in the story that's still interesting in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dawn's revealed as the key, I think, to the viewer a good bit before it's revealed to Buffy, right? Stuff like that. Anyway, before we actually talk about this episode.
Yeah, I think we've kind of there's been a soft landslide into the episode. But yeah, it's an interesting one. This is definitely a prime cut of classic Buffy.
Oh, I love it. It's just, I mean, it's like if you put these characters in this situation, like let them ad lib as their characters for 3 hours, I would watch it as of this episode, if you get me.
Yeah.
This is peak Buffy.
Oz is here, Cordelia's here, Snyder's even in the fucking episode. The only thing that's missing is Joyce, actually. Joyce isn't here.
Oh, she would have made a great addition as well.
Yeah. Angel is being very Angel. There's a lot of Buffy and Angel pathos, and I have to say, revisiting Buffy, I'm amazed at how not annoying their relationship is, because again, we've seen derivative versions of this like star-crossed thing in so many different properties, and it just doesn't come across The Fault in Our Stars the way a lot of things do.
Jesus, yeah, no, you're so true. It's not annoying, it's good.
Brian told me that I have to try and breathe away from the microphone now just to make it easier for him to edit. So I'm going to turn to the left and take one 7-minute long breath now. So continue.
It's good. But I mean, the characters are all there. They're just having fun. Like, this is by no means going to ever get in any of my top 10 lists of Buffy episodes. I don't think it should, but I fucking love it. This two-parter, it's just so classic. For me, it's the taste of classic Buffy. They're riffing, they're doing high school things, there's a threat, there's drama, there's
weird villains, there's a crypt,
there's pathos. Oh, love it.
There's a Maltese Falcon that has to be found.
And you can just feel like they had a bit of space to breathe in this episode. They didn't have to get to a conclusion by the end. They just had to set a bunch of stuff up. And with that space, they just managed to settle into their characters that little bit more. I quite like that, even though it didn't mean for a fairly lean content-wise episode.
Yeah.
But anyway.
It's always the danger of two-parters is that you will always, even a good first part of the two-parter should be trumped by a second part, which is, again, something mentioned happened with Infinity War and Endgame. Infinity War in retrospect just doesn't look as big as Endgame, and
I feel like people like Infinity War more though, don't they?
More?
Do they not?
Controversial. I don't know if that's true. Anyway, probably too soon to know. But I have a theory, right? That it's a demon, a dancing demon.
I'm disappointed you went there.
No, I have a theory about genre TV shows, which is the second season is really forgettable and really good in a lot of shows. Because if you think of a lot of things, first season is a setup. It's really prototypical. Third season often has, it should be the moment where the show grows the beard, and it's the moment where that's the memorable conclusion of the first arc. Second season has to get you to those archetypal changes, but you often forget the nitty gritty of how it actually happens, because this is a big episode. This stuff with Spike and Drusilla and everything in the middle here, and introducing Kendra is big. But I'll put my hand up and say that before we started doing this podcast, if you asked me which Slayer was called after Buffy, it probably looks like Faith, because my brain just immediately goes there. So a second season with a lot of shows like this is actually quite important, but it does it in so many tiny steps that you forget the actual effort it took to get them to high school graduation, that kind of thing.
I wonder, okay, so many sci-fi shows get cut down after the first season due to weakness, that I wonder if there's something to be said about the fact that a good science fiction show, or a science fiction show that lasts, usually has a very strong first season and then falters in the second season. Is that possibly it? That there's a lull there, whereas Buffy specifically had a slightly weak first season, but very intriguing, and then built on that momentum in the second season. So it kind of went up because it had something it had to reach a height. I don't know.
I think if you look at shows, modern shows which have sustained themselves in this arena, Buffy, Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones season 2 was quite good, I believe. I think I remember.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I think with their first season, what you need to have is you need to have that spark.
Yeah.
The elements can be rough. The dialogue, if you look, particularly say Game of Thrones, some of the early episodes, the wigs people are wearing, all that stuff can be rough, but you need to hit it with a strong enough concept that people will say, okay, show me more in season 2. And then if you're season 2, you will always be able to expand on it, and even if it's not quite as punchy as season 1, you will have gone bigger. And it's where science fiction or fantasy shows make their first season too heavy and too overlaying with, you know, trying to start in season 5 and be like, here's all our characters and all our mysteries. You need to have one good concept to hook people.
Yeah,
and I think Buffy absolutely did, like, as we've discussed for several episodes, the first season was janky in so many places, but the hook was just there, and the characterization was, they were there.
Yeah, and I mean, like, in some ways, I mean, season 1 is like a microcosm of the whole show as a whole. You know, Buffy going from rejecting her destiny to accepting it and growing up, that's the arc of the show.
Guys,
you know?
Buffy, boys, Snake's basement now. Yeah.
Exactly. Wow, okay. So they do that whole movement in the space of a season, and in that way they kind of, it feels like an unstarted kind of show by that point, by the end of season 1, and they have something to grow out of. I don't know, it's fertile ground certainly in season 1.
Yeah, I think there's a lot about this episode that is really memorable as well. I find they had a lot of things that I remember when I would have casually thought back on Buffy. So there's
Insect Man,
absolutely. So dear listeners, if you don't remember, this is the one with the 3 assassins who come for Buffy, one of whom she is kind of unremarkable, but she slits his throat using her ice skates while she's at the skating rink.
Sarah Michelle Gellar is a big ice skating fan apparently, and she she actually does her own skating in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's forgettable. He's a set piece. There is another one which is kind of forgettable, and really why she's there is to misdirect us and make us think that Kendra is the assassin rather than a Slayer. But I think I asked the casual Buffy fan of our age group, and was write down 20 things you remember from the first few seasons. I would say the guy who goes door to door selling beauty samples and looks like some nebbish American man in his 40s and turns out to be made of maggots. I'd say people would write that down. It's a really striking image.
It's fucking gross.
Yeah.
A quick note about the ice skating. Okay, so Sarah Michelle Gellar isn't the only actor in Buffy to have an ice skating background.
Okay.
Well, so Dawn, whose actress is called
Michelle
Trachtenberg, goes on and does that Disney movie about ice skating, which I can't ever remember the name of, the Ice Queen or Ice Princess or something like that. And she has to learn to ice skate on that basis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Julie Benz, who was Darla, was once rated the 12th best ice skater in the US.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Fucking job, Julie Benz. Wow.
I feel like it must be so stressful to be an actor in this kind of situation, because you need people who could do so many things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an actor who can't sing, you need to also be able to ice skate. You know what I really love is that I don't think I've ever heard of a single actor who's been in a period show who hasn't told a story about how they got called up to do this part, and they got called and they were like, okay, so you can ride a horse, right?
Horse riding is always,
and they're always like, yes, and they immediately hang up the phone and then try to get like horse riding lessons.
Yeah.
But every single one of them tells a story, and I got reminded of this because Jamie Lannister, what's his name, Nikolai
Coster-Waldau or something roughly like that.
Yeah. I saw him in an interview recently being like, oh yeah, I got the phone call and they're like, you can horse ride, right? And he was like, yeah, of course. But he basically told that story, and I'm like, I've heard that story 1,800 times. Everyone tells that fucking story.
I feel like he's probably one of the top people out of Game of Thrones, and I'm like, I hope I see him in other roles that I can engage with more after.
Remember he was in Mama? That was quite good.
He was in Mama, yeah. And I think he plays himself and his identical twin in that. And I thought he was a twin. I really struggle with that. I can never tell who's a twin or not.
I think he might be.
Well, we'll never know now. There's no way to find out.
Okay, no, you're right.
I'm right that he's not a twin, or he is a twin?
He doesn't have a twin in real life.
Okay.
So he plays twins in that movie.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
It's quite a good movie. It's quite like it's kind of a nothing horror movie, but the special effects are gross, and it's good,
weird boggy movement.
It's good fun throughout. I think it has vague connections to Guillermo del Toro, which is usually a good indication of a reasonably high quality horror film like The Orphanage.
Yeah.
But yeah, worth watching.
It has that thing we love about horror films where they like got in someone to do the movements of the monster who like was either a dancer or was able, but was like dislocate their shoulders or something.
Yeah,
but
it was definitely Evie Oddly. It was probably your man Abe Sapien.
Doug Jones.
Doug Jones, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. I think Evie Oddly probably, because we're fairly topical at the moment. These episodes are coming out kind of, you know, hot off the presses. I think Evie Oddly is probably our pick for winner
Of Drag Race.
Drag Race, yeah.
Probably mine, yeah. I mean, if I'm being realistic, I don't think she deserves it, but I like her the most. So,
well, you know, everyone is a pale shadow of queens who used to be on that show now. So,
it's so true. Yeah. I thought you were going to say of Angie, because I fucking love Vanessa Mateo, Angie Mateo. Yeah. I love her so much. One of the important things about this episode, in my mind, in terms of just like it being a generally enjoyable episode, is that it also kind of represents for me the halcyon days. And I remember I said this about Jenny Calendar in the last episode, is that was the end of the halcyon days between Jenny Calendar and Giles. And just to explain, halcyon days, in case you're not aware, is the 5 or 6 days of the year where you're guaranteed that it won't rain in Greek myth, right?
Yeah.
And from my mind, I'm not sure if it is that much of a trope, but in my brain it's always been that represents the good times, the beautiful memories that you had that can't be touched before things go inevitably bad again. So Jenny Calendar and Giles had their time in the sun, and it's now starting to fade. And for my money's worth, I think that's what's happening currently in Buffy. This is the height of the Buffy Angel relationship, realistically. In 2 episodes, it's going to be next episode is What's My Line Part 2, then it's Ted, and then it's Innocence, which is the point at which Angel and Buffy stop being Angel and Buffy pretty much forever. So yeah, for my mind, this is the height of the Buffy and Angel relationship. And it's also, you know, with Angel being lost, he's kind of the first Scooby to fall in lots of ways. So this is the first episode that kind of has the real core Scooby gang there, given that Oz is kind of introduced in a proper way and Cordelia is really integrated. So it kind of feels like everything after this is already lost something. And I think that kind of continues as the show goes on, is that like you don't ever really see, you kind of constantly yearn for this more positive, lighter, happier show that you feel happened now, and that everything's trying to get back there and it never quite does. I don't know, maybe that's me projecting onto it.
It's a real Joss Whedon thing, and he uses it to better and worse effect in various properties. But
Angel has a very sad version of that, in the sense that like it's very early on that you realize that the characters are all fucked from this point.
Yeah. Well, like Joss likes to take from you when you're at your most relaxed, and he does it well and in a non-cruel way. But it is a lot of what he does is based around an image of something that you're trying to return to, which can't, because things have to move forward.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of what Buffy is dealing with is this concept of destiny and this concept of forward movement.
Or you can't take a picture of this is already gone, is the line from 6 Feet Under, the season finale, which I made Jill watch the other night in bed after we were drinking, maybe.
It was literally just the last 10 minutes and I started crying again.
Yeah, I started crying again too. Another show in which it kind of shows the halcyon days of that family, which are kind of like in the wake of a tragedy, and they end up, you know, having this time together where they, you know, feel like a family again for the first time, really. And then it's taken away from them by the end of the show, which, like, I mean, if you haven't watched 6 Feet Under, I'm going to say actually don't listen to skip forward 30 seconds, but because it's a great show and you shouldn't spoil it for yourself. But yeah, Nate's death at the end of that really bookends that show, because Claire leaves at the end, and just that's the end of the family having their time of being a whole family together, which is so sad.
Well, it shares some emotional goo with Buffy in that way, because it is very much about like the show takes place over, was it 5 seasons?
5 seasons.
5 seasons. And Claire's like 20, like she's quite young in it, right?
She's 16 to 21, yeah. Yeah,
so Claire lives to be 100 years old. That's the conclusion of the show. And what we see as this core part of their life, these halcyon days, is a tiny sliver of her actual life and her memories, but something that she keeps photos of right up until her death, like 80 years later.
Yeah, so, and obviously part of that is that, you know, the content of your life, if you're going to be on a TV show, should happen in the TV show, It's hard to do that otherwise. If you're...
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I think that's one of the reasons why Buffy is so part of a cultural and an emotional touchstone for people of our generation, in a way that I feel like people even a few years younger than us didn't have that Buffy moment. And it's something I've experienced more doing this podcast. If people don't have those indelible memories in the same way of Buffy as we do. But I think it's very much that Buffy, in a really authentic way, transmits this feeling we had when we were teenagers of that this, like, Buffy's 16 to 23. That's how old she is in the course of the show, and she's constantly dealing with these feelings of trying to have some kind of stability while things are constantly moving forward and having to develop and mature with that. And it's something that I certainly think myself, and I think a lot of us might feel, is that this period, although we know 16 to like 21, 22 is only a small part of our lives and we've moved beyond that, it's so formative, and so many parts of our personality are shaped and ground into the right shape in that period, that it remains very significant in terms of, just even in your personal life, the touchstones you reach back to.
I mean, like, no music is ever going to be as important in your life as the music that meant the most to you when you were 16 and a half years old.
Yeah, a lot of what you do after that is variations on things that you establish in that period.
Yeah. And
Buffy really touches and really resonates with that. And I think the period in which Buffy came out and roughly corresponds to the period that we grew up in was a period that was less defined than maybe of the generation before us, in terms of people had, I think, much more specific roles in the 80s. There was much more...
People also didn't like giving teenagers a voice in the same way before that. I mean, like, this was the beginning of the teenage CW era. I mean, like, you had... I don't think Dawson's Creek even began before this, but you had 90210, which was maybe the first real teenage show. But so this was the beginning of teenagers having a voice. So being able to define that for teenagers, or even My So-Called Life is obviously a big example there. But this was the first one that really felt like it wasn't undervaluing the teenage voice to some degree, which is really important. In the sense that it actually specifically undervalues the adult voice in this show versus the teenage voice.
Well, I think why it's so striking and why it's resonant for people of our generation is also a lot of what's touched on in this episode, in terms of that, Buffy goes to a career fair and there's talk of kind of these predetermined paths and how do we, Xander says, how do they know from a multiple choice test what we're meant to be? But there's a sense of... Which
I thought was very heavily, that kind of like standardized test was very heavily echoed in the tarot cards.
Yeah, Drizzle was laying down the tarot cards, and very specific tarot cards, which are very applicable to the situation of a fallen angel and a maggot man and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, one of the things was apparently Marty Noxon just had no idea what tarot cards were. Like, she doesn't know any of them, so she just made them up specific to her storyline. She was like, I want a fallen angel and I want a
panther
coming out of a bush.
But yeah, so a lot of what it touches on is this, cycle, and Buffy is part of a destiny, a chosen one, a lineage, and you also have Giles in this episode indexing the diaries of Watchers going back hundreds of years, and how it's basically always this cycle of the Watcher and the Slayer. But what Buffy obviously is building towards is disruption of this, and how her independence disrupts the teenage Watcher relationship, and how she eventually shatters the entire Slayer line. And I think why it was so poignant and so relevant at that point in the 90s was, by and large, there was a certain flow to how society interacted age-wise, and how people developed, and how people went into jobs for life, and how there was a certain parental-child relationship and all this kind of stuff that was, I think, disrupted significantly from the 90s going onwards, with the rise of the information age, which things like 11-year-olds can be famous millionaire drag queens now if they're on YouTube at the right time.
So true.
Child stars, in the way that we have like Macaulay Culkin, really only started after the 90s in the sense that they could be emancipated from their parents and all this, and people were communicating in ways and at times that not only could they not have done before, but parents didn't have control over it, not in a negative way, but they didn't have the influence over child and teenagers' lives the way they had always had in every generation previously, because children had an understanding of technology which just problematized that whole relationship. So I think it's why it's an exact moment, a point at which the show strikes, which resonated as such a chord with our generation. And then once you pass that by even 5 years, it doesn't have the same familiarity that Buffy does for us. It becomes interesting and enjoyable, as opposed to true, in the way that I think Buffy is true for a lot of people our age.
Totally agree. We're very lucky in some ways that we grew up in a time that basically the show to watch was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You know, that was
appointment viewing.
That was the appointment viewing, in the sense that, like, it was so fucking high quality, you know? I mean, like, I'm so glad that, like, I don't think I was attracted to this when I was 12 or 11 because it was so good, you know? I'm sure that if it had been another show, I mean, like, I quite like Charmed at the time. I didn't keep going with Charmed the way I did with Buffy, but, like,
people love Charmed. I just never really watched it.
It's good fun. We should watch it at some point. I love, you know, I'm so lucky that I fell in love with it, because when I revisited it, it was like, oh no, this is stunningly high quality. It's so fucking good.
Yeah, and let me just to qualify, like, that's not to say that it's not still relevant, that people younger than us haven't gotten loads out of it, and definitely people of older than us can absolutely.
But remember when you'd be like standing in like in the schoolyard, basically talking to your friends. I never know what to call a schoolyard, because we called it the close, which was CLOS, which is an Irish word.
I just call it the yard.
Okay, cool. Yeah. But I mean, like, and talking about like Buffy or what happened in Buffy this week, like, that's a special memory to be able to have, you know?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think it has a unique resonance for people who are of Buffy age, roughly when it came out. But that's not to say that people who were, you know, definitely people who are now in their 30s, 40s that were waiting for a show like Buffy and would have grokked it as well. You know, I just think this is just something that, and there's something particularly, I don't know why, but something particularly Irish about it as well. Like, I think Irish teenagers really liked Buffy. I think it's a really simple thesis, yeah. Yeah,
I really agree. I mean, like, yeah, I know so many Irish teenagers who fucking loved Buffy at the time.
And when you look at this episode, I was very much noting that there's things they present in this episode as just unremarkable, which would be remarked upon. Like things like Willow's wearing that choker that everyone got from Claire's accessories around that time, you know. Everyone's nails are painted black. You know, there's just certain, like, that was the way people watched Buffy, how a lot of them would have dressed and presented themselves. And in Buffy, they present it as everyone in the world is like this, where it just wasn't really. Do you know what I'm trying to get at here? Yeah. They normalize a lot of that kind of soft, crushed velvet, gothy feeling that people had when they're kind of 15, 16.
Agreed. This episode, obviously, like us discussing here, we've been quite light in terms of details and discussing the episode. To be honest, it's a lean episode in terms of content. And that's absolutely grand, because the next episode we have, like, I have so much to discuss in terms of thematic shit, like Kendra as the other, and just Kendra in terms of, like, just the line of succession being broken. Yeah, but, like, this episode is discussion wise, but we'll definitely get into a bit more topical stuff next week. But yeah, go on.
Not topical at all. What you mean is we'll get into talking more in detail about this episode that came out like 20 years ago, like 2 years ago. No, I suppose just in terms of Kendra, it's interesting because, again, we know she's a Slayer. We know what's going on there. But from how it's presented to the audience, there's a whole misdirection where two of the three assassins arrive, and then the third image we see is Kendra's arrival, as I had remembered and predicted, in the belly of a cargo plane. And she's presented as being the third assassin, with the reveal meant to be that she actually sneaks up on Angel. She captures Angel, beats the crap out of him. She sees Buffy kissing him while he's in vamp face. She sees Buffy in his lair, sleeping in his bed, and attacks her because she presumes she's basically a Drusilla-like person. So Kendra attacks Buffy, and the great reveal, the dramatic moment being at the end, you know, Buffy being like, who the hell are you? And she's like, I'm Kendra, the Vampire Slayer. And Buffy being like, what? And then it's like, to be continued. And like I was saying kind of at the top of the episode, I just don't think that happened before this to any significant degree. I think a lot of any other reveals you would have on television were either really like melodramatic soap opera kind of reveals, like it's my baby and he's also my twin father, or it would be something kind of drier around X-Files, which is like, oh, the government did it. But this was like a really touchstone of like a fantasy reveal that we now are so familiar from your Games of Thrones and so on.
Yeah, no, it's a well done cliffhanger. Apparently Kendra's actress, whose name I have here, Bianca Lawson, who we have to note was in Pretty Little Liars 13 years after this episode came out, acting the same age. I shit you not.
She hadn't aged a day. She didn't look like she aged a day.
Age a fucking day. Bianca Lawson, she was told like a day before this episode started filming that she had to do a Jamaican accent, so it's not her fault.
It's not. We would say it's not a very good accent, and it's not. It's like a distracting accent. I feel like I've read things previously to say that she did have a dialect coach for it.
No, go on. No, please, go on.
Well, what I had read was that she had a dialect coach, Now maybe I'm confusing this with something else, but I think it was this. That she had a dialect coach who was from Jamaica and was teaching her a very specific regional Jamaican accent that was supposedly authentic, and that there is like, I don't know, a very specific, like the way you might, if someone was doing an Irish accent in a film, if you taught them a Cork accent, maybe an American viewer would be like, that's a ridiculous Irish accent.
Or if you taught them a South American accent, South Dublin accent, you might end up sounding quite American, and Americans would be like, oh my God, you sound so American.
But that's an old wives' tale. I don't know if that's true, but that's always been in the back of my head, that she is doing her best job with this accent, but it is definitely has not aged great.
But it does represent such a great part in this show of there being multiple Slayers, that Buffy has been broken off from the line of succession, and Buffy is no longer the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, from literally from the end of season 1, but very much codified from this point onwards. She's not the vampire. She's not the definitive article. She's not the primary Slayer in terms of the technicality of the Slayer line, and it's just really interesting, particularly when you think of
it really queers the Slayer line.
It does queer the Slayer line. Well, no, it really does. When when you think of it, that what we eventually find is that the Slayer line was created by these, basically abusive patriarchal council of shadow men thousands of years ago in Africa, who violated this girl, forced a demon into her to make her into a weapon, and the women have been used in this way by the Watchers Council, which evolved from the shadow men over thousands of years. That the worst possible thing they could have wanted to happen for the Slayer line was for there to be two Slayers who could talk to each other. Because what is the one thing Slayers can't do, which is actually learn from each other. Yeah, it's like this concept of the Slayer as it was constructed by men is to permanently invalidate the Bechdel test. Do you know what I mean? Like,
good point.
Prevent two named Slayers talking to each other about something that isn't the Watchers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and that's
the men hold all of the cultural, or they hold all of the social memory in that situation.
Yeah. And they write the history, and they it's such a, and I use this with accuracy, an Orwellian concept of controlling the language and controlling how Slayers interpret who they are as women and who they are in terms of the power they have and where it comes from. And very much the idea that this power is a favour granted by men, essentially, rather than something that comes in them innately, which is obviously what they're queering and what they're trying to break here. And I think a really crucial part of this gender conversation to come is when Buffy turns 18, and there's a whole thing where Jaws is forced by the Watchers to put her through a torture where he takes away her powers.
Which you know the name of, obviously.
Cruciamentium.
Yeah, of course.
Takes away her powers to see if she can still slay when she's depowered, and basically that's where the whole thing comes apart, where Jaws is like, I quit, this is a terrible thing we're doing, our values are fucked. But that's a real core part of this. It's not something I don't think it's something we really think of when we look back on Buffy, the gender politics between the Watchers and the Slayer, but it is so inherent to how feminism is framed in Buffy, is that what she reacts to and what she is fighting against is literally manifested in the patriarchy, the actual man council that has run the world for thousands of years. You know?
No doubt. You're totally right. We'll have to look at it as well next episode in terms of how the differences between Kendra and Buffy, about how Buffy does represent that strength even more so, in the sense that she has that chosen family and she's not isolated. She has thrown off the shackles of what she's supposed to be doing. So I think that's all great stuff, and I think the chosen family stuff is really present in this episode.
Yeah, and I think the first did we say this already? The first instance of the use of the phrase Scooby Gang? No, we didn't mention that. Yeah, so the Scoobs are Scooby fight, and yeah, so I think spoilers, Kendra dies. I guess what happens to Kendra.
It's really sad.
The kicker here is, Buffy kind of struggles with the fact, and has different feelings with the fact that Kendra is basically the Slayer she was meant to be, and how Kendra is like the perfect example of what a Slayer should be. And the other side of that is like, yes, she is the Slayer that Buffy's meant to be. She has no family and she dies.
Yeah.
And Buffy's weakness in terms of being a textbook Slayer, literally,
is her strength.
And it's two sides of that coin. So Kendra does everything she's meant to do to an absolute T, up to and including dying. And that's, what Buffy is not about.
So true. Okay, let's do a couple of Buffy bits. I actually have a bunch. Do you mind if I run through a couple that I'm pretty sure you don't have?
Go for it. I'm so excited.
Okay. So...
And he's not even fucking ready.
Okay, the police officer uniform at the career fair who stands in the background when Xander and Willow talk to Principal Snyder wears the crest of the movie Police Academy.
Okay. It's bizarre.
Bianca Lawson originally auditioned for the role of Cordelia.
Bianca obviously being Kendra, just to reiterate that. That's interesting.
Which
would have meant a main character who was black, which would have potentially been an improvement.
Oh, here we go. Okay, when Principal Snyder says to Xander, whatever comes out of your mouth is meaningless waste of breath and airborne toxic event.
Yeah.
This is an homage to Don DeLillo's 1985 novel White Noise, the second part of which is entitled The Airborne Toxic Event, which I should have caught because I've read White Noise. So I didn't catch that. It's just one of the notes I read.
I would definitely agree that Xander is mostly white noise.
I'd agree too. A bunch of different places note that Angel's apartment has 2 ashtrays on the table, and they're like, this is weird because Angel doesn't smoke, but they obviously don't remember the 90s. Ashtrays were fucking everywhere because everyone loved smoking indoors.
They were just a feature, and they're always like really heavy and glass, and people always get their head smashed in with them in like EastEnders or something.
Yep. So Patrice, the cop who we saw in the background, who will be featuring more heavily in the next episode,
the actual third assassin. Yeah.
Exactly. Spice Williams Crosby later portrayed Debbie in Angel Season 4 Episode 13, Salvage. She attacks Faith in prison working on behalf of the First.
Oh, interesting. Does she get killed in this episode?
She does.
That's interesting.
So it's just same actress being used in different points.
Yeah, because obviously, and she appears in Angel, because obviously Season 7 of Buffy would line up with Season 4 of Angel.
True, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So the last thing I'll say is that the vampire Dalton, who we see in this episode trying to understand all the notes and stuff, will later be in the episode Surprise in a couple episode time and will be killed by the judge. So let's keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, actually, I do remember that specifically because it's the judge burns out, again, his MO and his actual methods are really confusing in some ways, but he burns out humanity, and Dalton loves books too much.
Yeah.
Thing. But yeah, I did enjoy the bit where Dalton translates the archaic Latin as debase the beef canoe, which sounds like a song you would play for me off some band or heard. I'm like, it's actually really interesting. Just, it really meant a lot to me while I was 11. Yeah.
You can fuck off. Okay, great. What are your Buffy bits? Please give me them good Buffy bits.
Willow's still dressing very immaturely for her age. She's dressed like a bag of sour ribbons, like those sweets.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of roll it up. She dresses like Candy a lot. In a later scene, she's wearing a shirt where she's just wearing Bathos all sorts.
Oh, yeah. She also wears red dungarees in this episode.
She does. And she also wears a lot of hats that in the 90s would signify you've gotten a bad haircut you're trying to hide. Actually, it was probably quite a fashionable haircut, but it's always was a bad haircut. And maybe there's some gum in there that you need to hammer out, that kind of thing. Yeah,
true. Did you see Angel was wearing a blue silk shirt in this episode?
I think, and very baggy as well. I feel like at this age, David Boreanaz should have been wearing tighter clothes. That's my editorial opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
I found it very funny that Spike sends the boys to find the Dulac cross, which is basically the MacGuffin for the episode, on the basis of the directions that Drusilla gave him, which is a picture of a crypt. on a tarot card. She shows him a tarot card saying this is where the key is, and he's like, clicks his fingers, send it to this very specific place and in this context that I knew nothing about. So that I enjoyed the absolute lack of logic there.
I liked the line that brought up from Buffy, which was, note to self, religion, freaky.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. I think we need to keep an eye on religion in the show as we go forward. It's not exceptionally presented. He talks a lot about cults. He thinks a lot about cults. She also says at one point when she's I think it is an interesting point that her career assessment characterizes her as she should be a police officer and what that means, and I think we should think more about that as we go forward. But she does say that she's excited about the polyester donut and brutality of being a police officer, which is just interesting that's an evergreen topic. I think that it was topical in the 90s, topical now.
I mean, like the Rodney King incident would have been just a few years prior to this in LA, so
I feel like they referenced it in previous episodes.
Did they?
I think so.
Okay. Rodney King was a young black man who was kicked to death by some police. Mm-hmm. It was like a touchstone of police brutality in the 90s. Horrifying. Anyway. Yeah,
and I think was memorable, while not by any means being an isolated incident.
Because it was recorded, right?
Recorded, and it was one of the early high-profile events like this, which has obviously become, unfortunately, so prevalent now.
Caused the LA riots, didn't it?
Yeah. That's my understanding of it. Now, that could be wrong, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, me too.
I found it very strange that they took this test to see, should they be a prison guard or a tech magnate or whatever. And they posted the results of these up publicly in the notice board in the yard where everyone could see.
So
It was
mean.
very strange.
Yeah. This episode actually, very importantly, we didn't even talk about it, but Willow and Oz get paired together as the only two people who can possibly work for this giant tech company, which has to be Microsoft.
Yeah, it's basically fake Microsoft, but now this is like a
Micro hard.
Mega hard.
It's the title of your sex tape, Joel.
Thank you.
Micro hard.
Okay, let's move on. This is a regional high school, and they have fancy representatives from this tech company there, and they take Willow and Oz to a curtained off backstage area where there's a man in a white tuxedo.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Serving shrimp canapes. And it's just this level of like, this is a dream sequence rather than something that, if they had just said, we've selected you as highly intelligent candidates, but there's just this level of farce that they just can't resist going to sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Giles wears a polka dot tie, red and white polka dot tie, which is atrocious, and actually doesn't go with anything he's wearing, so I thought it was actually quite out of character.
What would a red and white polka dot tie go with?
Red and white polka dot suit.
Oh, okay.
There's a Dalmatian at one point. I was excited about that.
That's exciting.
Don't see a lot of Dalmatians in Buffy. The guy in the airport that Kendra beaks up has like boy band bleached frosted tips, which is going on the bag fashion. And I think I'm glad that we missed a period where kind of dyeing hair like that was socially acceptable to any degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just the other interesting things I liked that when she kills the guy with the skate at the ice skate rink, slits his throat, there's no blood whatsoever. Which I think was a very impressive feat. I did like the little bit of lore where they say that the assassins order the Order Traca dates back to King Solomon, and their MO, their mantra was to sow discord and kill the unwary, which is not really a business plan. It's not really a whole thought, it's just what assassins do.
Yeah, no, it's not that great. Do you want to do death count?
Sure. Do you have it there handy?
I do. Okay, so we
Hit
have
me with it. Stake me with it, Brian.
Okay, I will. So we're in the dusting right now, so...
Dusting. This is ASMR, I think. I don't know. I don't really understand ASMR.
Okay, so a vampire staked by Buffy, and then the other one gets away.
Do they have names?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Kalish, who is killed by Norman Pfister.
I believe that's Mrs. Kalish.
Did I say Mr.?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. She actually was in True Blood for seasons. That actress.
All right.
For about 6 seasons.
Yeah. Oh, that's why you recognised her.
Yeah. So she's Patricia Bethune. I'm not sure. And Octarius, who is the first assassin. Yeah.
Whose notably fearsome assassin's technique is when Buffy's kneeling down to like tie her shoelace, just try to pull her head off from behind, pretty much.
Yeah,
and
while Angels are standing there,
drag her over the wall. It's very, very subtle.
Yeah, exactly. We've already done fashion, so I think we can move ahead into the rating.
Yeah. So I'll kick off by saying that I would give this 7.8 maggots.
Oh wow, okay.
Because I enjoy it, but it is the first half of a 2-parter, and I really felt that, But there's a lot of enjoyable stuff in it, but it's just nothing to write home about.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to give it 8.8 airborne toxic events out of 10.
Oh wow, you're right up there, 8.8.
I love it. I think it's great. I think this is classic. I think this is just, I could watch it forever. It doesn't need to be laden. I don't think it needs to be something you need to write home about for it to be a really good example of what Buffy should be doing.
Sure. Good point.
That's, I think, the most dissonance we've had between our ratings ever.
Yeah. Well,
actually, no, I think I gave Witch a really high rating and you didn't. I think you're still wrong about that.
I've never been wrong, so it must be something else.
Oh, okay. Okay, well done us. It's a Saturday, so you should feel lucky that we're recording this.
You know that part of the podcast where people tell you where they are and what they're doing when they're recording it, which we do every time.
That's the best part of every podcast.
Yeah. So we'll be back next week with What's My Line Part 2.
Indeed.
Oh, we might struggle with naming these episodes, actually.
We'll pick 2 different international titles for
okay,
each.
Go on. Okay, I like that. But otherwise, we are. I'll call my shot on this and commit myself to doing it a bit. But we're going to be, I think, trying to do a push over the next while, just in terms of promoting the podcast, getting more people on this Buffy journey. Nothing crazy, but just it'd be great to get a few more people on board and just get a few more people disagreeing with us. So we like a good argument. So if you could be so kind as to go into your podcast app, rate and review us. According to some weird iTunes sorcery, my understanding is that does help us get more visibility. And just turn to the person next to you and say, hey, I listened to this podcast. You should listen to it too. I already have it downloaded. It would be really helpful. But otherwise, follow us on Twitter, and we will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Yes, we will. Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
See ya.